Let's start the panel of this afternoon with already a certain delay, but this is of course what happens when you have such a successful event with 900 persons. We have already missing, as you can see, one person because Rob Visser, who is the director of the European Asylum Support Office, had really to leave to go back, and he apologizes for this, but there was really no other solution. But I'm totally sure that with the other panelists we are going to have a very lively debate, not only about the future of Frontex after its 10th anniversary, but also about the relations and the cooperation between the agencies in the field of justice and home affairs. So this panel has a double subject. First of all, the challenges related to external borders, and secondly, the external dimension of this policy. So, first of all, challenges at external borders. I don't have, of course, to explain this to border guards. The challenges are, of course, increasing, and, well, we could see that in the European Agenda for Migration that the Commission has just presented, where the idea, for instance, of a hotspot of European agencies has been launched. And that's probably something that will inspire some of our speakers. The second subject that will be mixed with the first one is the external dimension, which is obvious when, of course, you are speaking about third country nationals migrating or trying to find asylum in the European Union. It is also related to many other aspects. For instance, of course, the fight against smuggling, because smugglers have, of course, very often roots or are even based outside the European Union, but it's also about capacity building with third countries. And to take a very burning example, well, the possibility to collaborate with the Libyan authorities, and I use a plural to say authorities, about possibly the destructions of boats used by smugglers, to just show one example. Well, to discuss all this, so we have representatives of four of the Justice and Home Affairs agencies, and I will let the speakers to introduce themselves briefly before we start this debate, starting with the representative of CEPOL.
Thank you very much. I call it a positive discrimination. Girls go first. Let me introduce myself. My name is Aya Kalnai. I'm head of training and research unit at European Police College, CEPOL. I'm a police officer of 20 years, mainly coming from criminal investigations background and dealing mainly with international cases. Before I joined CEPOL, I was deputy head of the Latvian State Police, responsible for international cooperation and legal affairs. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, after women's rights, human rights.
Thank you. My name is Adriano Silvestri. I'm representing the EU Fundamental Rights Agency here on this panel. First, I need to bring the excuses of our interim director, who would have liked to be here, but unfortunately today the event coincides with our management board meeting where he was required to stay in Vienna. At the agency, I'm responsible for the work in the field of asylum, migration and borders, and as part of that have been attending this event in the past on a regular basis, and it's always a pleasure to be here and to see many of you that I know from various events, and I'm looking forward to have an interesting and challenging discussion.
Thank you very much. We have all noticed that we have to be very careful because, of course, the room is full of border guards, but we have also police, as you noticed, and even a representative of Europol.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Oldřich Martinů, Deputy Director of Europol, law enforcement agency with the seat in Hague. Actually, when somebody asks me what I'm responsible for, I call myself universal soldier, that I'm responsible for everything apart core business, computers, people, and money. So, and that might be question what has left, yeah? There's plenty of, for instance, in external relation, legal affairs, I'm security coordinator and whatsoever. Back in my history, I joined Europol after 27 years of service at the national level. The best time of my career I could enjoy actually when I worked for Criminal Investigation Department in Prague in Czech Republic, and before I came I was Chief of Police. That's why I remember very well enlargement of Schengen area in 2008 at Czech Republic. So, and thank you for having been invited to this panel.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, we have a representative of the agency, Lisa.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon. My name is Krumberkov, I think it's on the plate there. I'm Executive Director of EU LISA. This is the youngest European agency, but being young is not necessarily a disadvantage because agency has a very important role. It provides all those big and sophisticated systems and services that help Frontex and border guards to do better their job, and support also agencies like Europol, EASO, and many others to fulfill their mandate. So if I put it in a different way, I'm the IT guy who is normally at the end responsible for all the failures, but not necessarily for the successes achieved in the business. A part of that, about myself, I'm in similar role already about 20 years, trying to make the best use of technology to support different businesses, and now apparently I'm trying to make the best use of technologies to support the important business of border management, law enforcement cooperation, and the European asylum system at EU level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have still 1 hour for this panel. The idea is to ask each of the speakers to make a brief statement of around 5 minutes. Then we will go for the audience for time for questions and answers. Back then to the panelists, and I'm sure that we are going to have a very lively debate. And, we first give the floor to the accusation, or the police, who is going to open the debate, followed then by, of course, the protector of human rights.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me floor again. Actually, I always looking forward myself going to Frontex and to meet my colleagues and to see uniforms. I was wearing uniform as well, so it always reminds me of good times when I was police officer. And actually now I'm working at Europol, and when I think about our cooperation with the Frontex, with border guards, there is always basic principle I would like always underline. We are 2 agencies supporting member states. It should be always underlined. So whatever we do, in the end, it's for the benefit of the member states. Although we have a little bit different mandate, but our actually, and that's what we are actually doing. We try to adjust our task according to our mandates and according to the objectives we have. And when I see Frontex, actually you are a very young organization and you have delivered excellent work. Yeah, you just some kind of self-reflection, what was the reality 10 years ago and what is reality now. The same I apply to Europol, because we are not so older, we are only 15 years old, so young organizations, and I would say that you have done excellent work. And I would like just to congratulate you, first of all, to that. And actually, I see here Arias, and you started at Frontex together with Ilka Laitien, actually previous director that you actually developed from Frontex, and now new director could take over and facing the new challenges, having already all structures in the place. So, second point, and it was mentioned today in one panel by former commissioner, it's related to the information and the sharing information. We as Europol actually gather, process, collect and analyze data in all areas of organized crime falling into your mandate. There are many areas which are very closely connected to the mandate of actually Frontex. Recently on the top it's facilitated illegal immigration. Secondly, we closely participate even in an impact project on trafficking human beings, trafficking in firearms. Recently, you will be associated, or you have been associated even to some other focal points. But I would say that there is still some room for improvement when it comes to sharing information. And we both, again, depend on the information which are contributed to us by member states. So as a servant in the hand of the member states, I don't want to criticize member states, just improve your contribution, but we have to be very careful whether we have at disposal any information which should be shared with somebody else, which should help some other entity, some other member states, not only to better investigate, but most importantly, to prevent something from happening, and it applies to all areas and facilitated legal immigration as well. Yesterday at management board meeting on Frontex, I could participate, and I really appreciate to be part of your discussion on cooperation between agencies. There was one important topic for us, and now I'm looking to the future, which is signature of operational agreement, which will allow us definitely further improve our cooperation, especially in terms of exchange of personal and sensitive data. So we are looking forward as Europol for the full implementation, which will further streamline and enhance our cooperation. The last point I wanted to mention, hotspot arrangements, which were announced by politicians in the European Agency on Immigration. My understanding is, from Europol perspective, that we can be closer to the source of information, immediately initiate support investigation, support to the investigation by affected country, in this case by Italy. At the same time, we can make cross-check of the information which we get, we can make analysis, and we can make available our databases to you, to Frontex and to the member states. That's my understanding of the hotspot. Also, there will be still necessary to clarify some arrangements, actually how to make it happen. So I am positive about that, because I think that Europol will have better chance to make assessment, make evaluation, make cross-check of the real-time information, which usually arrive with big delay through the different layers, which usually do not give any added value to the real-time information which can be collected in the source. And we are available to Frontex and to the member states, but this is just future. And the last point, if I may, I'm sometimes talkative, but you still haven't given me any signal, so it's okay. Now I've forgotten what I wanted to speak about. No, it's external relations. We can actually arrange cooperation with country, we call third country, third party outside of EU only in case they fully meet all requirements with regard to data protection, with regard to security. And you can imagine that it's more or less impossible for us to conclude any agreement with countries from the Northern Africa. We have cooperation with majority of Balkan countries. In this case, when illegal immigration routes go through this territory, we can actually provide support. But when it comes to the North Africa, I'm a little bit pessimistic, even from the longer perspective. So we can rely only information which are collected by member states or actually by Frontex, or as it was actually announced on Monday, setting up of this new European Naval Force Mediterranean, which at the first stage will focus on collection of the information to better understanding what's going on before the measures are actually launched. So in this case, there is possibility that we can even obtain information from this mission, as well as our databases are disposal for them. So this is the last point which came to my mind for the moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, we heard that Europol is, of course, at the service of member states, that you want to promote the exchange of information. Looking to the academic literature related to the topic of this panel, I found a rather extremely critical report done for the European Parliament in 2011 about the impact of the Charter of Fundamental Rights on European Home Affairs agencies. Extremely critical. Well, let's see what is the view of the Fundamental Rights Agency, who is at the service of human beings, of course.
Yes, thank you. Maybe let me start by going back a bit in history and explain how the Fundamental Rights Agency has been working with JHA agencies, but more specifically with Frontex. I mean, we signed back in May 2010, in fact, at the side of one of these events like the one today, at the side of the European Day for Border Guards at the time, a cooperation agreement with Frontex. And the purpose of that agreement was to use the expertise that we had, the fundamental rights expertise that we had in-house among ourselves in Vienna, to provide support to Frontex in dealing with the fundamental rights challenges that emerge in the course of their work. I mean, Frontex, as you all have, I'm sure, observed over the past years, has been exposed to criticisms, to criticism from the civil society, to criticism from various other players from the academia. The Frontex fundamental rights performance, so to say, has been regularly been discussed in LIBE, in the European Parliament. And what we saw as our role as one of the sister agencies of the JHA family, so to speak, was to use our expertise to support Frontex in managing or in doing what they have been created to do in a way that would minimize the risk of fundamental rights violations. Now, basically, what we intended to do, and hopefully to some extent managed to do, was on the one hand to prepare or to alert, so to speak, colleagues in Frontex about the challenges that exist out there, the challenges from a fundamental rights point of view. What are really the risks if you go and operate at the sea border, at an airport, if you carry out return operations? And how do we do this? We carry out very detailed research activities where we go out to the member states, to the borders. We interview stakeholders, we interview migrants, we interviewed in Sicily and in Malta and in Tunisia fishermen to get their views about what is going on. Out of that we produce reports, and based on those reports that summarize in a way the situation on the ground, we then suggest possible ways to in this case Frontex, but also to the policy level in Brussels on how certain challenges could be addressed or what steps could be taken. So in a way, our role is in a way twofold. On the one hand, bringing to the table the challenges. So this is what could happen. And then secondly, trying to provide advice on what could be done to prevent violations, what could be done to prevent or to reduce, rather, the risk of violations of fundamental rights. I mean, that has been our main goal. Maybe I can try to give a couple of examples now on how we do this, which also shows in a way that we are not doing it alone in a way, but also, and unfortunately Rob Fisser from EASO is not here, but often also together with other colleagues in other JHA agencies. One of the reports we issued recently, 6 months ago or so, provided an overview of the situation that we found when we went out at 5 large airports and 6 roads, so 6 land border crossing points. And what emerged from this report, as well as from a previous report we did on the situation in the southern sea borders, was that there are still difficulties at border crossing points to identify persons who require a protection response. We saw in the previous panel this morning children and separated children. It's one of this group. There was also discussion in that panel about potential victims of trafficking. And of course, another third group is persons seeking asylum. Now, the primary task of the border guard is not to provide protection, is really to carry out the border checks at border crossing points. But at the same time, because of the mixed flows, because of the fact that you have victims among the passengers coming, there is a need to be sufficiently sensitized, sufficiently skilled, to have the right tools to be able to identify if a certain person requires a specific protection response. And if so, know where to channel this person to. And this requires, in a way, 2 things. On the one hand, it requires, as we saw again this morning in the panel on child protection, if I can refer to the example mentioned by the Irish colleague, it requires a procedure in place, a referral mechanism. So it requires collaboration between the different agencies, so the border guards, the asylum agency, the child protection agencies. But it also requires that border guards are provided with tools which are useful, which are practical, that can help them to identify, for example, who could be an asylum seekers among the persons coming. And this would be an example of where both together with the European Asylum Support Office and us, we can assist, and Frontex, we can assist member states in creating something which helps border guards in carrying out a task which they were not initially created to carry out, but that lies on their shoulders because they are the ones, or you are the ones who see persons, victims, potential victims crossing, and you see them for the first moment or for the first time. Another example, I think at this debate there was not so much discussion around the technology and increased use of technology for border management purposes. But it's clear if we look into the future, the number of automated border control gates Europe-wide is increasing. The technology will more and more play an important role at border crossing points. Now, there is much literature out there regarding the advantages from a technical perspective, the possibilities that technology can offer, but there has been so far very little analysis of what the ethical, or rather the fundamental rights implications of such of use of technology, of increasing use of large-scale IT databases, IT systems, of databases, of biometric data. And here what we are now engaged in is we are carrying out a project where we try to look into both the advantages and the disadvantages from a fundamental rights point of view of the use of biometric data for border management, migration management purposes in the context of large-scale IT systems. And we see on the one hand it can bring certain advantages. If you have, in a way, a machine carrying out certain tasks, certain human errors or certain human prejudices that could be there are reduced. So the risk of being stopped because my skin color is different is probably lower. But on the other hand, there may be other new risks that come up. Let's say if I cross the border, I'm a carpenter or a manual worker, and I need to give my fingerprints, and because my fingerprints are torn, will I be viewed with suspicion in the future? A bit like now when asylum seekers are not able to give their fingerprints in the Eurodac system, where the initial reaction often is that the person has damaged the fingerprints so as not to be registered in Eurodac and returned. Who knows? Maybe. I mean, these are the things that we are looking into in order then to advise also Frontex on what could be potential challenges, what could be potential advantages. And what we see, looking back now at the last, 6 years or so that I've been personally involved in working with Frontex on these issues, is that by discussing these issues on a very concrete and a very practical level, there are many, many situations where risks can be reduced from the outset. And if I see about the developments over the year, including the way Frontex relates to fundamental rights, I mean, I can really praise the developments that have occurred. I mean, there are challenges. There will be challenges for all actors who are involved, either directly or indirectly, in law enforcement, in the law enforcement field. But I think that what I have noticed is that there is a readiness in Frontex to sit down and discuss and address the issues that are put on the table. And this is something we've very much welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we heard that EU JHA will be the responsible for failure as a service provider. Luckily, your agency has been created after the problems that we had for the implementation of the Schengen information system of the second generation. So we couldn't blame you for the huge delay that we had. But please.
Thank you. Well, I think we started from a wrong angle, looking in the past, but I think we should look a little bit more in the future, but taking also the lessons from the past. Well, first of all, I want to thank for the opportunity to be here and to congratulate Frontex with the 10th birthday. Maybe 10 years is not a significant age, but I believe for those 10 years, Frontex proved itself as a very valuable and trusted partner to the member states in their efforts to manage the borders of the Union. Now, I'm also quite pleased that in the panel in the morning, and also in this panel, my colleague Aldrich mentioned the importance of information and data and exchange of that most valuable resource today. And that comes to prove what I truly believe, that today border management goes through a very deep transformation. Now, if in, let's say, 10, 15 years' time in the past, the measure for a secure border was the height of defense at the border, the number of the border guards deployed behind. Today, this is completely irrelevant. And today, border management is in transitional, I would say even, has moved completely in the virtual world, meaning that now the security of the border, our ability to manage the border of the Union depend completely on the data and information we collect, process, use, but most importantly, share between relevant agencies, but also between agencies and the member states. And in that sense, I believe in the future, what we will see is much closer and deeper collaboration between all the JHA agencies, responsible directly for internal security and border management, but also with agencies like you, Lisa, not necessarily all the time responsible for the failures, but also ensuring the success of the future efforts to make the borders of the Union more secure, but also more open, because this is one of the challenges that we all together have to address today. How to basically keep Europe at the same time secure, but also easier accessible for people that want to come with good intent here and to basically support economical growth or exchange between the nations. It's also important, from my perspective, that border management cannot and shall not be looked into isolation, because border management is very important element of that comes together with security, with asylum, and we should look at that broader picture more and more. And in that sense, to address those future and present challenges, I believe the key will be closer and deeper collaboration between Justice and Home Affairs agencies, looking for complementarities rather than overlaps, making the best use of the available knowledge, resources, experience, rather than reinventing the wheel again and again and again. And that I believe will facilitate the long-term success of addressing that challenge. And in that sense, my agency has quite a good experience already working together with Frontex. Now, on such an important initiative like Smart Borders, where we join the efforts to benefit from each other's experience and to basically achieve a mutual goal, finding the best way forward for Smart Borders in the area of trainings, in the area of support of the member states, complementing each other's experiences, our agency from the point of view of technology, Frontex from the point of view of knowing very well the business of the border guards. And I believe that is the future. This is where we all together should go. And if I can conclude, to address the present challenges and the future challenges related to border management, to make Europe more secure, more safer, but more open, we should go and try to achieve as integrated as possible approach, both from the technology side, the obvious, using more systems, more integrated and sophisticated information sources and databases, but at the same time being more and more cooperative, looking for as much as possible synergies, but also harmonization of the approaches, practices, working methods that will facilitate further efficiency and the end success of the efforts that we all together invest for border management, for security, for asylum, and for Europe as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we already heard that training is very important, and this is the core business, of course, of the CEPOL. So please, give us your evaluation.
Thank you very much indeed. I will try to look at a bit different perspective of how law enforcement operates. It's quite indicative to see that European agenda on security opens with the statement: Europeans need to feel confident that wherever they move in Europe, they have to feel that their freedom and that their security is well protected. Good statement, we all agree. And why I'm saying this is to tell why law enforcement agencies and law enforcement institutions are here. It is our job. Now the question, how secure do the people feel? Eurobarometer actually published a study very recently in April 2015 saying, in general, Europeans feel secure in European Union. But in some countries, up to 30% of people do not. And many of these countries are actually located across the external borders. There is also a change in terminology used at the EU level now in the recent years. We are not speaking so much anymore about the police, about the border guards, about the customs. Today we overwhelmingly heard from the Commissioner, from Signor Vittorini, from jail, about the law enforcement community. And I must say that sitting here amongst the colleagues of the JHA agencies, we know the value of working together extremely, extremely well. And we have moved very strongly forward in bringing together our knowledge, wealth of knowledge that each of us possesses. But that is not necessarily the case everywhere and in every area. And training is sometimes suffering, and a very good colleague of mine from Frontex actually sitting here in the room as well, I will quote her, she called training a Cinderella of law enforcement. And that is true. And that proved to be true during the times of financial crisis, because what mattered was the arrests, seizures, securing the real operational work. I always compare how the military work in training, they know very well. Badly trained troops, lost battle. In the law enforcement community, that is not so apparent. Lack of training is not so apparent. But well-trained officers at the borders, inside the Schengen area, inside the European area, is absolutely, absolutely paramount. And the security agenda clearly says, we have the cooperation tools already here. We need to ensure that law enforcement officers are aware of them. But when I speak to colleagues, for instance, from the police, they think that some cooperation tools do not relate to their work. The same happens when I speak to border guards. They think that some law enforcement cooperation tools don't relate to them because they originated from, let's say, police cooperation. But today, again, both commissioners very, very clearly said information exchange across the law enforcement community is of paramount importance. So this is where we can help each other, also with the training. That's why I think it is very, very important also for the agencies and for the whole law enforcement community to address the training needs. What do we need to do? Because security agendas quite clearly say what needs to be done. We have to identify how and at which level. And here I want to refer also to another Commission communication on European law enforcement training scheme, which is based on principles of subsidiarity. And here I must say, and I've mentioned that several times before when talking to colleagues from Frontex, I really, really envy the work Frontex has done for the community of border guards in harmonizing training. Common core curriculum, SQF, these are enormous projects of absolutely fundamental strengths for harmonization of the EU-level response. I must say that in the police we are not yet there in many areas. We are still looking at different policing systems because we are so diverse. However, it is high time to think about the common training needs assessment at the EU level. That has never been done. And training needs not of a particular single isolated law enforcement entities, but of the law enforcement community. And then we can look how we can address them, which gaps have to be addressed at the national level and which have to be addressed by the EU level training. Agencies altogether, we have already done a lot in harmonizing our training portfolios and aligning our interaction with the training needs. And we are evolving there. For instance, last year, all agencies, we launched a Justice and Home Affairs training matrix. This is a tool that eventually will be used for programming of law enforcement training at the EU level. Strategic training needs assessment at the EU level. This is another expectation of the legislators towards the JHA agencies, to understand where and how we want to get to a well-trained law enforcement officer. Last but not least, I want to speak a little bit about the external dimension of the internal security, because these days it is extremely difficult to separate what is internal and what is external. Capacity building in European neighborhood countries. And again, if what a colleague, Martino, mentioned before, for Europol, for operational agencies, it's at times might be difficult to ensure information exchange, because that involves sensitive information, personal information, and you need to ensure that it is handled at a proper level. Training actually is a privileged area, because we can build bridges. We can deliver the EU fundamental rights-based message to our neighboring countries. And I honestly think that agencies have a serious role to play in that scope, in delivering that EU-level message across to our partners. Another thing with the capacity building projects, very often we, at the EU level, we sometimes think that we know better what the guys across the border need. And I think this is, again, high time to change that approach and address each country's individual needs in appropriate manner. Okay, I will stop here and see where the discussion goes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, the clock is always ticking quicker than our speeches. It's already 5 minutes after 4, and we still have a little bit less than 20, well, around maximum 20 minutes, because we have to leave the floor to Mr. Legheri for conclusions. But I think it's good to give the possibility to the audience to ask questions or make comments. If possible, don't say that you will be brief, but be brief, and please introduce yourself. We have one person there, and one at the back. So please.
So I'm the first to ask the questions. I'd like to especially to ask to the FRA representative to comment on the involvement of, in fact, your agency in this hotspot measure that is included in the new EU migration agenda. And in particular, it would be excellent to have additional information on how you could operate in in Italy, in particular, together with Europol. And then a second question, which is very linked as well to the measure of hotspot, would be, I mean, I've heard from the representative of Europol that it would be extremely important to collect information, cross-check them, and analyze them to be used together with Frontex and other agencies. And again, it would be excellent also to learn how the information collected could be used to raise awareness on what instead is security and what instead, as it was mentioned in the morning, sometimes it's only perception of like migrants being really a risk for European citizens.
Thank you. Let's collect some more questions. There was one person there and then there, but okay. Who has the microphone?
Here's yeah. Thank you. My question is to Mr. Garkov and Mr. Silvestri. You both refer to new technologies, information system, and the use of biometrics. I think one of the main principles to structure that information structure and to protect fundamental rights is purpose limitation. Could you elaborate a bit more on the challenges you see? Because we all know that political views change, practices may pop up with different aims, and technologies in practice itself always are looking for different purposes. So how sustainable is this principle in the virtual reality we are almost entering now?
Thank you. So there is one more question there.
Michał Parzyszek from Frontex. I have a question to Adriano. I'm here. Hello. You said that there was already a progress made when it comes to protection of fundamental rights in law enforcement environment, but there are some challenges. I would like you to name them. Will you?
Thank you very much for that very precise question. Somebody else? I'm sorry, but with the light in my eyes, I'm not sure that I can see everybody. Yes, there in front.
Thank you very much. István Ördög from European Asylum Support Office. Thank you for all the panelists, and I would like to ask, since the former commissioner also mentioned in the morning the importance about synergies and connecting, integrating systems. Do you think that it is realistic to have a single European data system which would allow the border agencies and also the asylum caseworkers to have access to the data which is fed indirectly to the system? Since we've heard also comments from your panel about the importance of real-time information, I think that would be the key if everybody would feed the same data system and then access to this data, of course, with the appropriate guarantees and the user rights. Do you think it's a realistic approach to raise something in a European level? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this provocative question. One more, or we go back to the panelists? Yes. Well, I think we should start with the Fundamental Rights Agency. We heard a thing like, is FRA in the hotspot, or will the hotspot be in a hotpot? And also the idea of a single European data system, which I have to say is rather challenging, certainly for FRA, but even for EU LISA, because in the regulation of EU LISA, the principle is that you cannot share or exchange data or information unless there is a legal basis allowing this. So we have quite some challenges, and let's start to hear them from the point of view of human rights.
Thank you. First, on the hotspots, FRA as such is not involved operationally. We don't have, like Frontex, like other agencies, EASO, an operational arm as such. What we can do and have done and will continue to do in a way, regardless of whether we name it now a hotspot or not, is that if there are certain fundamental rights challenges that emerge in the implementation of new policies, that we can come in and give our advice or our expertise on how to go about them. But so far we have not been involved, or we have not been requested by the European Commission to do this. Second, on the larger question of, if I understood correctly, a one-fits-all database or something like this. I mean, this raises, of course, many challenges. One of the basic principles when you collect personal data and put together a database is that you use the data that you collect, you can only use for the purpose for which you have collected that data. And if you want to expand it to other purposes, then I mean, you already get into difficulties. I mean, we have seen, when was it, 2 years ago, how difficult it was to negotiate the legal basis to allow law enforcement access to Eurodac database. And one of the challenges, or one of the issues in a way that we also would like to understand as we carry out this project on biometrics is to what extent anecdotal evidence that is being, or anecdotal reports that we receive from civil society, from academia, from other sources about the fact that personal data or data stored in databases is used for purposes that are not intended to, or that data is accessed for other reasons than that they were created for, is something that I think we would see as quite problematic, and therefore would like to really get a better grasp on. As regards the third question on what are the challenges, I mean, this. I think it depends. If we want to reply the question at a very concrete level, we could go into very, very details. But I think the bigger challenge is that in the field of fundamental rights, enormous developments have taken place at the policy level. If I look at the way the operational plans, Frontex's operational plans and the various annexes or the handbooks now, or the manual as it's called, are structured and the information they contain, I see that there are sufficient guarantees to minimize risks for fundamental rights problematic implementation. At the same time, however, where there's still more to do, I think, is at the very operationalization or implementation level. That really starts with making sure that every officer who is deployed goes to the ABGT training. At the ABGT training, really sufficient and adequate fundamental rights knowledge and skills are provided to the person, but also when the person is on the ground, that what has been learned, what has been taught to him or her at the various courses is actually put in practice. There has been an increasing number of reporting of incident reports from the field, but it's still limited, and I think at the level of the really implementation at the border crossing points, at the green border, at the sea borders, that's where more could be done. But more specifically, I think there are also then challenges when you start, on a number of areas. One that I see coming, particularly now after the agenda for migration, is that there will be an increased attempts to cooperate with third countries. Such cooperation can take different formats, but it can also be operational cooperation. And we have had examples in the past of either joint patrolling or deploying EU member states individually, not under a Frontex operation, have deployed officers on patrol vessels of third countries. One can imagine that in the future Frontex will be increasingly exposed to situations like this, and then the question arises, where do the responsibility line lies if something goes wrong? And here we are in a very unclear situation. We are in a situation often where operations take place even in territorial seas of third countries, for example. And both politically, of course, but also legally, finding out the right, or assessing, how would I say, in the right manner, how much risk there is that the EU member state or Frontex indirectly can be drawn into situations where human rights are violated outside the EU at the high seas is something that requires more attention from my point of view. But then there are many more specific challenges. For example, if you look at returns, the return directive requires member states to set up effective return monitoring systems. But today we still have, out of the 28, probably some 10 member states that either don't have a system yet, or they have a system on paper, it doesn't work on practice. So and that, of course, has implications also for Frontex and for the implementation of, in this case, coordinated joint return operations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, normally the police is asking questions, but this time Europol will give the answers.
Yeah, just understand there are some questions directed to Europol when it comes to the hot spot. Actually, we are a law enforcement agency. We don't have any coercive powers. We are set up for supporting member states in prevention and fighting against organized crime and terrorism. So actually we are set up for collecting data, making some added value analysis and provide it back to member states, or in this case to Frontex, because Frontex is expected playing some leading role actually when it comes to the hotspot. But now we are still at the working level, discussion how the final setup will look like, because it still was not clarified. But just I want to underline that Europol will play the role in terms to being closer to the source of information, which will be obtained from the debriefing interviews, then cross-check against databases in order to identify whether there are some criminals who are involved in criminal activities or in facilitation of illegal immigration, or maybe even in some terroristic activities, because, for instance, we cannot exclude that these channels are used by foreign fighters getting back to Europe. When it comes to the communication, the whole package to the public or even to the immigrants, actually I see a little bit paradox, because if I imagine myself that I decide to immigrate to Europe from Africa, I collect all my money, what I have, give it to somebody actually who is actually criminal, but to some extent this person is helping me to cross the sea and to get to the Europe. And then I am approached by some official asking me the question to provide the testimony against the person who paradoxically helped me to cross the Mediterranean. So I think that it might be a little bit sometimes even difficult, even from the psychological point of view, to organize such interviews and ask the question. But I don't know whether I understood correctly actually your question, but it's finally about the communication of the foreseen purpose of the hotspot actually to migrants or to the public. But I am afraid that it should be done by member state affected, or by Frontex, or those who are actually affected in these activities. We are only supporting, and I don't want, as a representative of Europol, to hide myself behind the other agencies. That's what I personally understand how it could look like, but I would like to say that it still has not been clarified, the final setup of this hotspot, how the regional operational team of Frontex, I heard yesterday during the management board, will look like. So there are still some open questions. Second one, harmonization or interoperability of data. I don't want to steal the answer from group, but there is a project called Universal Message Format, and Frontex actually closely related to the project, with the goal to harmonize data to make them interoperable, with a view to make easy exchange, automatic cross-check, and of course to make even easier control of the processing of data. So we have such a project in place already. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, in particular, very interesting last comment. Complementary views from CEPOL.
Thank you very much. I don't think that I need to go into any operational details of what has already been discussed in relation to the questions raised. The only thing I must say is reiterating the importance of knowing what we have and knowing how we can use it. And I don't think that we are there yet in many, many areas. We have had Schengen information system since very, very long. And still we have law enforcement agencies who hardly use it. So setting up new systems, we always have to explore how we can use the existing ones. This is indeed the question of the legislation and proportionality of the action taken by the EU. And here I want to reiterate what I heard in one of the panels today on passenger flow, where the UK represented a model for I would say it's still profiling, but on the basis of set rules, intelligence-led rules, how to select people who need to be looked at closer. Still, we have to be extremely careful how we set those rules and how often we look at them again to set the securities for people, because nobody wants to be profiled if you are not the bad guy, because 99% of people who cross the borders are law-obedient people, and they don't want to be led somewhere aside and be frisked or searched, because that makes them feel criminals. That makes traveling difficult, and these are fundamental questions, and I think it's extremely important that any measures that we law enforcement like to implement are proportional. And then I especially welcome the Fundamental Rights Agency being a JHA agency and reflecting on these difficulties, because that brings us to reality as well. And this morning we spoke about is the Schengen success or not. I can tell you, before we joined my country, Latvia, before we joined Schengen, I absolutely loved borders, because we knew exactly who is coming, who is leaving, using which car, and who was traveling with the person. Excellent for investigations. When I, as a citizen, was sitting at the border between my neighboring country for 2 hours, that completely changes the perspective. So this is something that we always have to keep in mind also, especially when we speak about migration and asylum seekers. They are vulnerable. Majority of them are vulnerable. And if you hear the statements from the people who are, you all know it, I know. I just want to remind it that when they say it doesn't matter if I die in the sea or I die where I come from. That's why I put a bit of so much emphasis on capacity building, on actually making possible for them to live in the country where they come from. Thank you.
Thank you very much. EU LISA is the last born agency, but seems to face a lot of new challenges in the future.
Well, or if you put it differently, we inherited lots of challenges from the past that we need to address in the future. Well, there were indeed a couple of questions relevant to EU LISA, and I just want to echo the excellent interventions of Ulrich with regards to exchange of data. Now, the question whether we need another or one big EU-level IT system has two dimensions. The direct answer to that is no, we don't. And I truly believe into that. It's a different question whether we need to exchange and make a better use of the data and information we collect. Because if we take only the data information that the the agencies sitting in this room now keep and use. And we print it out, most likely the pile of paper will reach from here to the moon, maybe even beyond. So there is a lot of information around. And making the best use of it is not by deploying another and another and another and another system, which, by the way, increases also the risks from security point of view, but also the risks for privacy and data protection, because the more databases we have, the more difficult it is to control. So the key is synergies and interoperability from my point of view. And this is not something that today represents a danger. On the contrary, synergies and interoperability helps us to address many present dangers related to security, to border management, but also many present or perceived threats for privacy and data protection, for reasons that I mentioned. So, in that sense, we need more synergies and interoperability rather than more new systems. This is my true belief. I will not even mention the economical side of that approach. And here comes the second question about the, well, sustainability of purpose limitation. I think I already gave partially the answer of that question. Yes, this is, I think the principle is still sustainable today. Because today technology, capabilities of modern technology basically facilitate respect to that principle, facilitate better respect to privacy and data protection rather than infringing or jeopardizing them. Because today technology can make sure that regardless of the intent, for example, of Europol to keep personal data for longer than it is legally allowed, at the day when the retention period expires, that data will disappear, and Europol cannot do anything about it. Same with Frontex, same with us. So this is a very little example how technology today basically can help to address better the concerns that exist with regards to data protection and privacy. The key here is not technology, because technology by itself, systems by themselves, do not jeopardize or do not resolve issues or do not create more danger for privacy and data protection. It's about the way they've been used. And here comes something that was mentioned earlier in this panel, but also in the morning by the Commissioner. We need to look and harmonize, speaking about in the context of border management, the border management processes in Europe. We need to look towards integrated border management, because even we deploy a number of nice tools and systems at EU level. If those nice tools and systems are used in 29 already, different ways in the member states, then the effect will not be as expected, and most likely the concerns related to privacy, data protection, fundamental rights impact will be higher. So I think this is the way, this is the direction where we all should go and look. Integration and harmonization, not only of the technology, but also of the working practices and business processes, and then we will achieve the real result.
Thank you very much for your answers to those questions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, when I look to the program, I see that at 4:30 an exhibition is going to start. I don't think that neither the panelists, neither the director of Frontex wants to be in charge of that part of the program. So time has come, I think, to ask Mr. Fabrice Leggeri, the director of Frontex, to draw some conclusions following his point of view related to this debate.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, and this is probably the main message, I would like to thank the colleagues from the other agencies for being here. We could talk longer about the future, but I think now if we look at the present, we see that the cooperation has been improved because we are all challenged now. The EU policies in the field of justice and home affairs are under pressure, because this is a field of EU policies where citizens expect the EU to be efficient. We know that, let's say, policymakers, be it in Brussels or at national level, can raise some expectations, and if at national level their policies are not successful, they say this is because there is a lack of European cooperation. And then if it is not successful at EU level, they say, no, look, this is because the people in Brussels or at EU level are not able to implement this. We should do it at national level. So I think from Frontex perspective, now the agency is 10 years old. I would say it's still a young agency, but we see that the question which is at stake is whether the Schengen free movement area is considered as well-functioning, or are there concerns? And then we would somehow come backwards to a kind of checks at internal borders. So I think now we have to improve, first of all, the interagency cooperation, but that means also at national level. Because when we are talking about integrated border management, it should first start within each individual member state. And with this regard, I can say that Frontex joint operations can somehow be an incentive for such cooperation within member states. I had some examples recently when I visited some joint operations in some member states, and I realized when I talked to the individual representative of the services that they had now to be successful in their own country with this cooperation. Now we can also at EU level deliver more, and very soon we will be able to implement in the field this hotspot concept mentioned by the migration agenda issued by the Commission. It is a concept, but it is up to us now to make it an operational reality. We will have an opportunity in Triton operation. We are now upgrading Triton. We are preparing a kind of upgraded operational plan with an operational Frontex regional team, which will be designed in such a way that we will have on board different entities of Frontex, different functions from Frontex side, but also national law enforcement agencies from the host member state, and of course, and this is our common interest, liaison officers from other EU agencies who are concerned. So, first of all, I would like to say that in this kind of situation, Europol and EASO, Europol because we need to have this link between the external borders and what happens within the country, within the free movement area. So I see this as an example also for Frontex, for member states, to improve their own functioning between the police services, the investigation services, and the border guards. It will be more efficient at EU level, and it will be the opportunity to have a better link between, for instance, JHA Mare and Triton. This is an example. In the future, we could have other examples. EASO will be present and is invited because, of course, when we are talking about mixed flows of migrants, the first question is, are those people migrants in need for protection? If they are, then I prefer to say it clearly, this is not Frontex business. If they are in need for protection, they have to be referred to the competent authorities for asylum procedures. But if they are not, then they have to be channeled to other procedures, including return policy. This was mentioned clearly this morning. This is clear in the migration agenda. So I have no problem with that. But this is, again, one step towards a more integrated external border management, law enforcement cooperation at EU level, and integrated management of migration policy. We also have, this was, let's say, deployments in the field. We also have cooperation for the long term, and here I would like to mention EU JHA, because we will have the smart border package, so we have a common cooperation. But we will for sure also have to work with the Fundamental Rights Agency, because the situation is very tricky at the borders. So there is room for cooperation with everybody, and I think this will be the future of our agency. So again, I would like to thank very much the colleagues. I would like also, Professor, to thank you for having chaired this and moderate this discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, it's time to conclude this session. Thanks also to the audience and for the persons who asked questions. And now you can enjoy the exhibition while waiting also for the barbecue tonight. So enjoy the afternoon. Thank you.